The lecture hall at Caldwell University was almost empty that Friday evening. Almost. Professor Laura Mercer stood at the whiteboard, her back straight, her expression unreadable, her hand moving with the practiced confidence that comes from years of being the smartest person in every room she had ever entered. The equation she wrote, stretched across the full length of the board, a nonlinear partial differential equation that had kept the entire mathematics department silent and frustrated for 3 weeks. She stepped back, brushed the marker dust from her fingers, and let out a short laugh. "Anyone who can solve this," she said to Owen Park, her only grad student still in the building at that hour, "I'll marry them on the spot." Owen smiled. A few students lingering by the door chuckled nervously. Near the hallway, a janitor named Ryan Calloway paused his mopping. He turned toward the sound of laughter first, then toward the board. His eyes moved across the equation slowly, the way eyes do when they are not merely reading but recognizing. He stood there for 4 seconds that felt much longer. Then he stepped through the open doorway, picked up a marker from the tray, and began to write. Ryan Calloway, a janitor with a mop and yellow rubber gloves, just picked up a marker and started writing on a professor's board. Laura hasn't turned around yet. When she does, everything in that room is about to change. Subscribe and stay, you won't want to miss what happens next. There is a version of Ryan Calloway's story that begins in triumph and ends in silence, and that is the version most people never get to hear because they stopped looking the moment they saw the uniform. The version that matters begins in Worcester, Massachusetts, in a 2-bedroom house on a street where nobody had ever gone to college. His mother, Carol Calloway, worked the early shift at a textile mill for 18 years and spent her evenings reading to Ryan at the kitchen table, not children's books, but history and science, anything that made the world feel larger than the narrow corridor of their neighborhood. She used to say that a library card was the only free door in America that nobody could slam in your face. Ryan believed her. He used that card relentlessly. By the time he was 12, he was solving algebra problems from textbooks his school had not assigned yet. By 15, a math teacher named Mr. Pereira sat him down after class and told him something no adult had ever said directly, that he had a genuine and uncommon gift, and that it would be a waste to leave it untouched. Ryan applied to Massachusetts Institute of Technology on a scholarship for exceptional students from low-income households and was accepted at 17, the first person in his family's history to attend a university. At MIT, he flourished in the way that only people who have been quietly starving for intellectual challenge can flourish when they finally reach the table. His focus was applied mathematics, specifically fluid dynamics, modeled through nonlinear partial differential equations. His faculty advisor, Dr. George Aldridge, described Ryan's dissertation research in a departmental memo as among the most promising directional work this department has produced in a decade. Ryan was 26 years old when that memo was written. He had a desk covered in papers, a coffee machine he treated like a lifeline, and a wife named Dana who called him every evening at 8 to ask how the numbers were going. Dana Calloway was 34, a registered nurse at Massachusetts General, the kind of person who could make a room warmer simply by being in it. They had married in a small courthouse ceremony in Quader, Cambridge. They had been trying for a baby for 2 years when Dana became pregnant with Sophie. When the ultrasound confirmed it, Dana sat in the hospital parking lot and cried for 20 minutes, not from sadness, but from the specific relief of something long hoped for finally arriving. Sophie was 5 months old when Dana found the lump. The diagnosis came back on a Wednesday. Stage 3 lymphoma, aggressive, moving. The oncologist used careful language, the way doctors do when they are trying not to remove all hope from the room, while still being honest about the dimensions of the threat. Dana sat very still through the appointment. Ryan did not. He asked every question he could form, took notes in the margins of a hospital intake pamphlet, asked the oncologist to repeat the treatment timeline twice, and drove home with both hands tight on the wheel and Sophie asleep in the car seat behind him. He did not speak during the drive. There was too much to hold and not enough room to speak at the same time. He sent a single email to MIT that night. 4 words in the subject line, 2 sentences in the body. Family comes first. I won't be returning. He did not ask for a leave of absence or a deferral or any of the structures the university had in place for exactly these situations. He simply stopped because Dana needed someone with her at every appointment, every treatment. Every morning she was too sick to lift Sophie from the crib. Every afternoon she sat at the kitchen table and tried to eat something and could not. There was no version of Ryan Calloway that could have done anything differently, and he never second-guessed that decision. Not once, not even later, when the weight of it settled into his chest and stayed. Dana fought for 2 years. She had a period in the 2nd year when her scan numbers improved enough that she started talking about the future again. A trip to the Oregon coast, Sophie starting school, whether Ryan might go back to his research once things stabilized. He told her he was exactly where he needed to be. She looked at him with the directness she always used when she suspected he was managing her feelings rather than sharing his own, and she said, "Promise me you won't disappear into yourself when I'm gone." He promised. He meant it. He was not entirely able to keep it. Dana died on a Tuesday morning in March, with Carol and Ryan on either side of her, and Sophie asleep in the next room in a portable crib that a nurse had quietly wheeled in the night before. Ryan sat with her for a long time after, long enough that the light through the window shifted from gray to pale yellow. Then he picked up his daughter and drove home. Grief does not arrive all at once. It ambushes you from inside familiar things, the smell of her shampoo on a pillow, Sophie laughing in a way that sounds like her mother. Ryan stayed present for Sophie, fiercely and completely, in the way that people who have made deathbed promises tend to honor them. But the mathematics he had once lived inside now felt like a country that had changed while he was away. He could still read the language. He just could not find his way back to the door. 2 years before he took the janitor job at Caldwell, he had submitted an application for readmission to a doctoral program there, a respected research university in Boston, where the mathematics department had the resources to support his work. He sent the application with 3 letters of recommendation, a research summary, and a personal statement he rewrote 7 times trying to explain, without asking for pity, why he had left and what he was capable of now. Dean Arthur Finch signed the rejection letter. The official reason was boilerplate: significant gap in academic record, insufficient evidence of continued scholarly activity. Ryan read it twice, set it on the kitchen table, and went to help Sophie with her bath. He never applied anywhere again. Every night, after Sophie was asleep, he sat at the small kitchen table in their Dorchester apartment and worked through mathematics on whatever paper was on hand, old envelopes, the backs of Sophie's drawings, the margins of grocery lists. He was not preparing for anything. He was doing what a musician does when they play alone in a room with no audience, keeping something alive that they are not ready to let go of. Sophie had noticed the habit early. She called it Dad drawing his numbers. She drew her own pictures beside him sometimes, the 2 of them quiet at the kitchen table while the neighborhood outside went through its ordinary hours. He had been working at Caldwell for just over a year, the night Laura Mercer wrote that equation on the board, and a man in a blue maintenance uniform stepped out of the hallway shadow and changed the course of both their lives. Saturday morning came cold and overcast, the kind of Boston morning that feels like the sky has not yet decided what to do with itself. Laura arrived at the mathematics building at 8:20, moving with the focus of someone who had been thinking about something since before they were fully awake. She pushed open the door of Lecture Hall C and stopped. The board was filled, every panel of it. The equation she had written was still there at the top left, and below and beside it, in even and unhurried handwriting she did not recognize, was a complete solution. Not a partial one, not an attempt, a full derivation, methodical and clean, with a notation at the bottom right indicating an alternative approach for the 3rd transformation. A note left the way, a professional leaves notes for whoever comes after them. Laura walked slowly to the board and read it from the beginning. It was correct. She could see that within 30 seconds. She kept reading anyway, following the logic step by step, and what she found was not only correct, but elegant in a way that made her feel, briefly and uncomfortably, like she was reading work by someone who understood the problem better than she did. She took out her phone and photographed each panel. She found Owen in the graduate student office. He told her he had seen the janitor, Ryan Calloway, tall, brown hair, usually worked the third floor standing inside the lecture hall around 10:30. He had not thought much of it. Laura thanked him and went back to her office. She sat down. She looked at the photographs on her phone. Then she said, aloud to no one, "That's not possible. Someone must have come in after him." Owen, who had followed her to ask if she wanted coffee, heard the sentence through the half-open door. He did not say anything. But something in the way she had said it, not as a question, but as an immediate correction of a fact she had not yet verified, stayed with him for the rest of the day. The security office was in the basement. The hallway camera outside Lecture Hall C showed a clear and continuous record. Ryan Calloway had entered the room at 10:22. He had exited at 11:02. Nobody else had entered or exited in those 40 minutes. The work on that board had been done by one person, alone. Laura watched the timestamp twice. She thanked the security officer and walked back upstairs, and she did not say anything else about someone coming in after him. She found Ryan the following Monday morning in the maintenance corridor on the lower level, a long, narrow hallway that smelled of floor wax and cold fluorescent light. He was organizing supply carts with the quiet efficiency of someone who has done this many times. He looked up when she stopped in the doorway. "You wrote on my board Friday night," she said. It was not a question. Ryan set down the bottle he was holding. "Yes, you solved the equation." "Yes." She studied him for a moment. His expression was easy and still, the way expressions are when a person is not surprised by the conversation they are having. She pulled a sheet from her clipboard, wrote a graduate-level differential equation on it, and held it out to him. "Show me," she said. Ryan looked at the paper. Then, at her. Then he took the pen she offered and worked through the problem standing against the supply shelf with the paper flat on the clipboard. 4 minutes and 50 seconds later he handed it back. She checked it. The solution was correct. The approach was not one she would have taken more direct, less formal, arriving at the answer by a route she recognized, on reflection, as more efficient than her own. 8 seconds passed, maybe 9. The hallway was quiet. Somewhere above them, a radiator ticked. "Where did you study?" she asked. He told her. MIT, Applied Mathematics, doctoral program, dissertation on nonlinear partial differential equations. He had left before completing the degree. He did not say why, and she did not ask yet. She thanked him. He nodded and went back to the supply cart. She walked upstairs and sat at her desk and looked at the solution on the paper for a long time. The handwriting was neat and unhurried, the annotations precise. There was nothing on that page that looked like guesswork. Everything had been placed deliberately, the way you place things when you know exactly what they are and where they belong. She had been looking for a flaw, some sign that she had missed something, that the solution was technically correct but incomplete in some way that would become visible on closer inspection. She did not find one. Then she went into the university's academic record system and searched for a name she had just learned. The application was there, submitted 2 years ago, complete and thorough, with 3 letters of recommendation from MIT faculty, a 40-page research summary, and a personal statement that ran to 4 pages. She thought it was one of the most carefully honest pieces of academic writing she had read in years. Not asking for sympathy, but making an argument, clearly and without self-pity, for why the work he had left behind was still worth finishing. At the bottom of the file, a rejection letter signed by Arthur Finch. She printed it, walked to the dean's office, and knocked. Finch listened without interrupting, looking at the printed letter on his desk. When she finished, he said in the measured tone of a man who had given this answer before. A man who walked away from his program once will walk away again. We can't invest resources in someone with that history. He said it with the confidence of someone whose logic had never been questioned. Laura thanked him and left. Her phone was in her jacket pocket, its voice memo app open and recording from the moment she had turned it on before knocking, not a calculated decision, but the reflex of someone who is anxious and needs something to hold on to. She did not listen to the recording that afternoon. She locked the phone and put it in her desk drawer. That evening, she thought about Ryan's application. She thought about the phrase, "walk away again," and about the casual certainty with which Finch had said it about a man he had never met. She thought about herself 10 years ago, sitting in her own advisor's office being told she had a future in this field, and about what it had meant to have someone look at her and say, "You belong here." Ryan, that same evening, was at the kitchen table in Dorchester. Sophie was doing homework at one end. He was at the other, working through calculations on the back of a permission slip from her school because it was the only blank paper within reach. Sophie looked up at one point and said, without looking at his work, "Dad, are you the smartest janitor ever?" He laughed, a real one. "I'm just the most careful one," he said. She accepted this with the seriousness of an 8-year-old who has decided her father's answers probably make sense on some level she has not reached yet. He stood up, opened the refrigerator, closed it again, stood there a moment with his hand on the handle, then went back to his numbers. Ryan and Laura worked together for the first time on a Thursday evening in early December, 3 weeks after the maintenance corridor conversation. She came down near the end of his shift. She said she had a proof she was developing for a paper on wave propagation modeling, that she had hit a structural problem in the middle section she could not resolve, and she was asking if he would be willing to look at it with her. She said it the way you say something when you have practiced not saying it wrong. Ryan said yes. They worked in her office, a narrow room lined with books and whiteboards covered in partial problems. She walked him through what she had and where it stopped. He listened, without interrupting, which she noticed. Most people she worked with interrupted before she finished. Ryan waited until she was done, then walked to the whiteboard and stood in front of it for almost a minute. Then he picked up a marker. His approach was different from hers in ways she could feel before she could explain, more intuitive, less formal, more willing to take a step that could not yet be justified in order to see where it led. She was the opposite. She built scaffolding before she climbed. Watching him work, she understood for the first time in a long time that there was more than one valid way to get somewhere. They worked for 2 hours. Owen walked past the office door, saw the two of them standing side by side at the whiteboard, and kept walking with a small expression on his face that he did not share with anyone. At 9:30, Ryan said he needed to get back his neighbor Claire, who watched Sophie when he worked late, had an early morning. He put the marker down. Laura looked at the board. What they had done in 2 hours would have taken her 3 days alone, and she was not certain she would have reached the same place. "Thank you," she said. "It's a good problem," he said. She could hear that he meant it. He drove home through the wet December streets, Sophie asleep when he arrived. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time before going to bed, not working, just sitting. On the cardboard binder that held his private papers, the calculations he did at night for no reason other than to keep the thing in him alive, he had written Dana's name years ago in permanent marker, in the same blue ink he used for everything. He had not planned to write it there. It had happened the first night after her funeral, when he was sitting at the table with Sophie asleep in the next room, and the world outside completely indifferent to what had just ended, and he had picked up a marker and needed to put something real on something solid. He looked at her name now in the kitchen quiet. Then he looked at the numbers below it, the numbers that were his in a way that nothing else quite was. For the first time since Dana died, the mathematics did not feel entangled with the loss. For a small, clear moment, it felt like itself, like something that had always belonged to him and had been waiting, patiently, for him to remember that. The post appeared on the university's internal faculty and staff network at 7:43 on a Wednesday morning, uploaded from an account belonging to a second-year graduate student named Brooks Whitfield, who regularly had lunch with Dean Finch. It was a photograph of Lecture Hall C's whiteboard, taken before the board had been cleaned, with a caption beneath it. "Apparently, our janitor moonlights as a mathematician. Maybe he should mop up his own equations." There was a laughing emoji at the end. By 9 o'clock, the post had 47 comments. Some were from students who found it funny in the way people find things funny before they have thought about them. Some were from faculty who had seen the footage or heard the story and were not sure what to do with it. A few were simply uncomfortable silences expressed as non-responses. Ryan was on the 3rd floor running a floor buffer through the hallway outside the faculty lounge. He could not see the network post from his phone on shift, but the faculty lounge door was half open. Someone read the caption aloud. Someone else laughed. A third voice said something Ryan did not catch, and there was more laughter. He stopped the buffer. He stood in the sudden quiet of the machine being off, listening to the sound of people laughing at something that was about him. He restarted the buffer and kept moving. Laura saw the post at 9:15. She read it, looked at the comments, closed the window, opened it again. Then she went to find Ryan. She found him at 11 in the hallway outside the basement supply room, replacing a broken light fitting in the drop ceiling with the patient efficiency of someone who has fixed the same kind of broken thing many times. She waited until he finished and had lowered the stepladder. "I saw the post," she said. "I'm sorry this happened here." Ryan looked at her. His expression was not angry. It was something quieter than anger, the look of a person who has learned to hold certain things without fully showing them, because showing them fully costs something they can no longer afford to spend. "It's not your fault, Dr. Mercer," he said, "and it's not the first time." She had no answer for that. There was nothing she could say that was not either an excuse or an acknowledgement, and the acknowledgement felt insufficient in a way she could not get around. She told him she would have the post taken down. He nodded. She left. That evening, sitting in her apartment with her laptop open and the post still up in one tab, Laura made a decision. She opened her email and drafted 2 messages, one to the mathematics department coordinator, one to the university events office. She read both twice, changed 3 words, and sent them. The Caldwell University Mathematics Department Colloquium met on the first Thursday of every month in the main lecture hall of the Whitfield Mathematics Building, tiered seating for 90 tenth, a projection system nobody used correctly, and a tradition of attendance that faculty observed more out of institutional loyalty than enthusiasm. This particular Thursday, the room was full. Word had moved through the department with the efficiency it always moves through small academic communities when something genuinely unusual is happening. The story of the board, the security footage, the maintenance corridor confrontation, the whiteboard session in Laura's office, all of it had been circulating in fragments, each version slightly different, all pointing toward the same improbable center. Laura had submitted Ryan's name as a guest presenter under her faculty sponsorship 7 days earlier. Dean Finch's email objecting on procedural grounds arrived within hours. His argument was that Ryan held no faculty or student affiliation. Laura's response cited Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the Faculty Handbook. Any university employee could present at academic events with full faculty sponsorship. She was the sponsor. Finch did not reply. Ryan arrived at 2:58 in his maintenance uniform, because his shift ended at 3 and there had been no time to change. He had asked Laura the day before whether he should find something else to wear. She had said, "Wear what you have. It's not a costume contest." He stood at the front of the room and looked out at the rows of faces. Faculty he recognized from the hallways. Graduate students he had seen in the building for months. Owen Park in the 3rd row, looking directly at him with the quiet attentiveness of someone who had been waiting for this. Dean Finch in the second-to-last row, his reading glasses on, his expression composed in the specific way that powerful people compose their expressions when they believe they are about to watch something collapse. Ryan picked up the marker. He did not begin with an introduction or an apology. He began where the mathematics was at the top left of the board, with the original equation, and he walked the room through his thinking from the first line to the last. His voice was clear and unhurried. He explained not just what each step was, but why it was necessary. And when he reached the transformation in the middle section, where his approach diverged from standard methodology, he paused and gave 2 reasons for the divergence. One technical, one intuitive. Both were valid. 3 faculty members in the front row had opened notebooks within the first 5 minutes. At 20 minutes in, he presented the extension, an additional result that emerged from the completed solution, a direction the proof could move that no one in the room had noticed. Laura was standing against the wall to the right of the board, and she did not move when he wrote it, but her hand tightened slightly on the folder she was holding. He set the marker down at 25 minutes. The room was completely silent. Owen Park stood up first. His applause was slow and deliberate, the kind that means something different from enthusiastic applause it means. "I understood what I just witnessed, and I want you to know I understood it." 2 other graduate students stood, then a faculty member in the 4th row. Then the room, not all at once but steadily, the way water rises rather than splashes. Finch did not stand. He sat in the second-to-last row with his hands folded on the desk in front of him, his expression unchanged. Ryan noticed this the way you notice the one thing in a room that is not moving when everything else is. Then he let it go. The colloquium ran 40 minutes over schedule. Nobody left. The recording leaked on a Friday. Owen Park had not intended to leak anything. He had borrowed Laura's phone briefly after the colloquium to check a reference she had cited, and in setting it down on the conference table afterward, he had inadvertently left it there when the debrief session ran long. A junior faculty member found it, saw it was unlocked, found the voice memo, and listened to 30 seconds of it. She sent the file to 2 people. By Saturday morning it had reached the provost's office. The audio was 41 seconds. Finch's voice was clear. The sentence "a man who walked away from his program once will walk away again" was unambiguous, the casual certainty of someone who had made this kind of judgment many times and had never been asked to account for it. The provost's assistant called Laura on Saturday afternoon. The provost's office called Finch on Monday morning. The university's formal response came quickly, in the way that institutional responses to potential crises tend to come quickly when the story has already been circulating through enough channels to be dangerous. A letter arrived at Ryan's Dorchester apartment on a Wednesday, hand-delivered by a university courier. It offered full readmission to the doctoral program with a complete scholarship covering tuition, fees, and a research stipend. It was signed by the provost. Ryan sat at the kitchen table with the letter. Sophie was at the other end, working on a reading assignment, her feet tucked under her on the chair. He looked at the letter for a long time. Outside, a bus went past on the street below, its headlights sweeping briefly across the kitchen ceiling. Sophie turned a page. The refrigerator made the small sound it made every 40 minutes or so, a soft, mechanical click that he had long since stopped hearing consciously, but which now, in the quiet, he heard clearly. He set the letter face down on the table and did not pick it up again. Laura came to Dorchester that evening. She had texted first, asked if she could come by, and Ryan had said yes without overthinking it. She stood in the small living room and took it in without commenting the second-hand couch, the lamp with the slightly bent shade, Sophie's books mixed in with Ryan's on the shelf. The kitchen was visible through the doorway, and on the wall above the table, fixed with 4 pieces of tape, was a piece of heavy cardboard covered in equations. Densely written, carefully organized, a year's worth of nighttime mathematics arranged in the particular order of a mind that has been working through something slowly and consistently. She looked at it for a long moment. Sophie appeared from the hallway in her pajamas, assessed Laura with the frank scrutiny that 8-year-olds deploy on adults they have not yet classified, and said, "Are you the professor from Dad's work?" Laura crouched down to her eye level. "I think your dad is smarter than me," she said. Sophie considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "I know," she said, and went back to her room. Ryan was in the kitchen making tea. Laura came in and sat across from where the letter was still on the table. He put a mug in front of her. "The stipend is enough to live on," she said. "And the research conditions they're offering, it's a real offer, Ryan. Not damage control dressed up as generosity. The work you'd be doing would matter." "I know," he said. "You haven't answered them yet." He sat down across from her and looked at the letter, then at the cardboard on the wall, then at Laura, who was looking at him with a directness he had come to trust, not performed honesty, but the real kind, from someone who had recently stopped performing entirely. "I'm not afraid of going back," he said. "I think I was, for a long time, but it's not that anymore." He paused. "I just needed to know I was doing it for the right reason." She did not ask what the right reason was, because she already understood it. She had heard it in the way he talked about the work in her office, and in the way he had stood at that board at the colloquium, not to prove anything to anyone in that room, but because the mathematics was worth being in the same room with, regardless of who else was there. He answered the letter that night, after Sophie was in bed. He sat at the kitchen table with his laptop and the letter side by side, and typed his response in 3 paragraphs. The first accepted the offer. The second outlined his condition, that he be permitted to teach part-time in the undergraduate program while completing his dissertation. Not for the additional income, though the income helped, because when he had stood at that board at the colloquium, he had thought about himself at 17 in Worcester, carrying a library card and a belief that certain doors existed that he could open, and about the fact that a teacher named Mr. Pereira had once taken the time to say something direct and true to a kid who needed to hear it. Ryan wanted to be that for someone. He did not put it in those terms in the email. He said only that teaching was part of how he worked, that it clarified his thinking, that he believed it would strengthen the research rather than compete with it. The third paragraph thanked the provost. He read it over once, changed nothing, and sent it. Dean Arthur Finch submitted his resignation 6 weeks later. He cited personal reasons. Laura heard about it from the department coordinator on a Tuesday and felt, in that moment, not satisfaction but a clean and uncomplicated sense of something having corrected itself. She thought about how many other names might be in those files that nobody had thought to look at. The following Saturday was cold and bright. The particular clear cold of a Boston January morning that makes everything look recently washed. Ryan and Sophie were at a bakery in Dorchester they went to most Saturday mornings, a narrow place run by a Portuguese family, with good coffee and a specific almond pastry that Sophie had strong opinions about. Laura arrived 10 minutes after them, wearing a borrowed coat and carrying a newspaper she had not yet opened. She sat across from Ryan and next to Sophie, and Sophie immediately told her about the book she was reading. A girl detective solving mysteries in a lighthouse, and had Laura read anything like that at 8? Laura said she actually had. Sophie demanded details. Ryan drank his coffee and listened with an expression he was not fully aware he was wearing. But that looked, to anyone who glanced at their table, like someone who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and has only recently noticed that he is no longer carrying it alone. "Do you like math?" Sophie asked at one point. Laura looked at Ryan across the table. "I'm learning to like the way someone else does it," she said. Ryan heard it. He looked at her for a moment over the rim of his cup. Then he smiled, a real one, unhurried and complete, the kind that changes a person's whole face. The spring semester began on a Monday. The air was still cold, the trees still bare, but there was a quality to the light by 7 in the morning that suggested the season was making up its mind. Owen Park walked across the Caldwell Quad carrying 2 coffees and stopped for a moment outside the Whitfield Mathematics building to look up at the second floor, where a light was already on in an office at the end of the corridor. He stood there for a moment, holding both cups, then went inside. Ryan Calloway stood at the whiteboard in his office, a small room at the end of the second-floor corridor, with a window that looked out over the parking lot and a desk that he had not yet managed to organize to his satisfaction. He was writing out the framework for his first undergraduate lecture, scheduled for Wednesday morning. The course was applied mathematics for engineering students, not glamorous, but a room full of people who needed to see that the language of numbers could be used by anyone who learned to speak it, and that felt like exactly the right place to start. Owen knocked twice and left one of the coffees on the corner of the desk without saying anything. Ryan nodded without turning around. Some conversations do not need words. Sophie was in the corner of his office with her drawing supplies and an audiobook playing through her headphones, perfectly content in the way that children are content when they are in the same room as a parent and have been given art supplies and permission not to talk. She had already drawn 3 pictures of the equation on the whiteboard, not solving it, just copying the shapes, but she had gotten the symbols remarkably right. Down the hall, Laura was working through the final revisions to their paper formally. Officially their paper, with both names on it, equal in the author list, no qualifiers, no hierarchy. It had been accepted by the Journal of Mathematical Analysis and Applications, pending minor revisions. She was working through the last of the reviewers' comments, with a cup of tea going cold beside her keyboard. In the main lecture hall on the ground floor, the whiteboard had not been cleaned since the colloquium. Laura had asked the facilities staff, quietly and without explanation, to leave it. The original equation was still visible in the top left corner, and beside and below it, in the even handwriting of a man who had been waiting a long time to write in a room like this, was a solution that was still, 2 months later, the most elegant proof anyone in the department had seen that year. Students walked past it on their way to other classes. Some stopped to read it. A few took photos. Most did not know the full story, only the rough outline, the janitor, the professor, the equation, which was enough to make them look at the board with the kind of attention they did not usually give to whiteboards in empty rooms. Ryan did not need the board to stay there. He knew the proof. He had known it since the night he wrote it, working alone after the building went quiet, with nobody watching and nothing to prove to anyone but himself. But he understood why Laura had kept it, and he felt about that understanding the way he felt about most things between them, now grateful for its exactness, grateful that it did not need to be explained. Sophie pulled off her headphones and looked up. "Dad, I have a question." "What is it?" She pointed at the whiteboard. "Why is that one different from the others?" "What do you mean?" "The others you do quick. That one, you've been looking at it for a long time." He considered this with the seriousness her questions deserved. "Because I want to make sure it's right," he said. "The first time I do something in a new place, I want to make sure it's right." She nodded, accepting this, and put her headphones back on. He turned back to the board and kept writing. Down the hall, Laura made a note in the margin of a revised proof. Outside, the morning light was strengthening, filling the quad with the kind of January brightness that promises, without quite delivering, that winter is almost over. The board in the lecture hall below held its equation. The numbers on Ryan's kitchen wall held their long patience. Sophie drew another shape she could not yet solve, and in the careful logic of what had already been written, there was the beginning of what would come next.